Because if it were, and if it was really happening, we wouldn't be talking about anything else. As soon as you turned on the TV, everything would be about that. Headlines, radio, newspapers, you would never read or hear about anything else. As if there was a world war going on. But no one said anything about it. No one was talking about it. If burning fossil fuels was so bad that it threatened our very existence, how could we just continue like before? Why were there no restrictions? Why wasn't it made illegal? I have Asperger's syndrome, and to me, almost everything is black and white. I think in many ways that we autistic are the normal ones, and the rest of the people are pretty strange. They keep saying that climate change is an existential threat and the most important issue of all, and yet they just carry on like before. If the emissions have to stop, then we must stop the emissions. To me, that is black or white. There are no grey areas when it comes to survival. Either we go on as a civilization or we don't. We have to change. When school started in August this year, I decided that this was enough. I sat myself down on the ground outside the Swedish Parliament. I school striked for the climate. Some people say that I should be in school instead. Some people say that I should study to become a climate scientist so that I can solve the climate crisis. But the climate crisis has already been solved. We already have all the facts and the solutions. All we have to do is to wake up and change. And why should I be studying for a future that soon will be no more, when no one is doing anything whatsoever to save that future? And what is the point of learning facts within the school system, when the most important facts given by the final science of that same school system clearly means nothing to our politicians and our society? A lot of people say that Sweden is just a small country and that it doesn't matter what we do. But I think that if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school for a few weeks, imagine what we could do together if we wanted to. Today we use 100 million barrels of oil every day. There are no rules to change that. There are no laws to keep that oil in the ground. So we can't save the world by playing by the rules, because the rules have to be changed. Everything needs to change, and it has to start today. So everyone out there, it is now time for civil disobedience. It's time to rebel.
This is about a rebellion that is happening now. Although perhaps by the time you hear this, the rebellion will be over. Perhaps the rebellion will have died suddenly or without warning. Perhaps it will have simply vanished, consigned to a long history of failed revolutions and fruitless campaigns. Perhaps it will have been successful. Perhaps you will now all be deep in the process of constructing a new kind of world, a world in which all human beings are created equal, and no person or party or corporation sits in dominion over their fellow human beings, or indeed, the earth. It is impossible to overestimate the significance of where we are now. The journey here has been long and arduous. It has been fought for by thousands of scientists, academics and activists all across the world. It has been hard and punishing and sometimes very lonely. Extinction Rebellion began in a small English town. It began with 15 people who had studied and researched the way to achieve radical social change. Together, these 15 people decided to embark upon a long campaign of civil disobedience, a campaign that would transform the way in which we talk about the climate and ecological emergency, and force governments all over the world to act. We started touring the country, visiting communities, villages, towns and cities. We gave talks, took action, and slowly began to build a movement. The talks we gave were clear, straightforward and led by science. We walked people through the facts and then, at the end of the presentation, provided a necessary and rational response: mass civil disobedience. So, on the 31st of October 2018, we declared ourselves to be an open rebellion against the UK government. Since then, in such a short space of time, hundreds of Extinction Rebellion groups have been established in countries all across the globe. The movement is now active in every single continent except Antarctica. Hundreds of thousands of people have signed up to block roads, shut down bridges and, if need be, to get arrested. In April 2019, we began our first phase of international rebellion. In Pakistan, we marched through the capital. In the US, we glued ourselves to a bank. In the Netherlands, we occupied The Hague. In Austria, we blocked roads. In Chile, we lay down in the middle of a street. In Ghana, we blew whistles to sound the climate alarm. In the UK, meanwhile, we shut down 5 iconic locations in central London: Oxford Circus, Marble Arch, Waterloo Bridge, Piccadilly Circus, and Parliament Square. We stayed there for 10 days, delivering a rolling programme of speeches, discussions, and public assemblies. We closed down fossil fuel companies, blocked the roads around the Treasury, and glued ourselves to the London Stock Exchange. We attempted to cause as much economic disruption as we possibly could. And by the end of the fortnight, over 1,000 people had been arrested. The protests had cost the city tens of millions of pounds and completely confounded an already stretched police force. We were quickly invited to meet senior politicians from all major parties, including the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, in the very heart of government. The next day, the UK became the first country to declare a state of climate and ecological emergency. We've already seen a huge shift in public opinion. More and more people are joining this movement as they realise that the climate crisis and the associated crises of capitalism and colonialism that caused it will not be solved by gradual reform and rotten compromise. This is a crisis that requires radical system change on a scale never seen before. Extinction Rebellion is a decentralised mass movement of concerned citizens. It is open to anyone who takes action in a non-violent way, actively mitigating for power and standing by the action that we have taken. We work to transform our society into one that is compassionate, inclusive, sustainable, equitable and connected, where creativity is prioritised and where the diversity of our gifts is recognised, celebrated and encouraged to flourish. We believe that government has failed to understand the severity of this crisis. We believe that we must now take radical action to reduce the very worst effects of climate breakdown, and, in doing so, reform and extend our broken democracy. We therefore have 3 key demands. 1. The government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, working with other institutions to communicate the urgency for change. 2. The government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. 3. The government must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. These demands have been adapted by different international groups in accordance with our decentralised system of governance. The tactics we use in the United Kingdom or the United States are not always an effective or safe strategy in other countries, especially those under repressive regimes or dictatorships. The majority world needs no lectures from us. They have been on the front lines of this struggle for centuries, and we do not presume to tell them how to stage a rebellion. We act in solidarity with them and their struggle, and we bow to their experience and their wisdom. After all, this is a movement led by indigenous communities and those in the majority world. It is led by women and children and people of colour. It is led by the people most affected by this crisis. The people who are being displaced now, the people who are dying now, the people who have been trying to warn us for years. We acknowledge that Extinction Rebellion is just one articulation of a feeling that is being felt all across the world. We see ourselves as one branch of a much wider, stronger, wiser movement. The future will not look like the present. We know that for certain. The rebellion will not happen under any one banner or any one slogan. The future is going to be humble, because if this is going to work, then we will all have to work together. After all, we are facing an unprecedented global emergency and our governments have completely failed to protect us. To survive, it's going to take everything we've got, and everyone we know. The challenge we now face is extremely daunting, because the problem, unfortunately, is not just the climate. The problem is ecology, The problem is the environment. The problem is biodiversity. The problem is capitalism. The problem is colonialism. The problem is power. The problem is inequality. The problem is greed and corruption and money and this tired, broken system. The problem is our complete and utter failure to imagine any meaningful alternative. We need to rewild the world. That much is obvious. But first we need to rewild the imagination. We must all learn how to dream again, and we have to learn that together. To break down the old ways of thinking, and to move beyond our current conception of what is and what is not possible.
I think that what this movement is trying to do is to help people to realise that they can rise up in a peaceful and meaningful way and prove to governments which are elected to serve us that they are not serving us whilst their decisions are destroying the future for the next generation. And unfortunately, things are happening so much more quickly, I think, than a lot of people expected. People like you and I will live to see horrendous consequences of this inaction and this failure to recognise science. It's an absolute kind of ignorance of reality. You can't ignore reality forever without something awful happening to you. You know what I mean? You can't stand in front of a bus and pretend it's not coming.
I joined Extinction Rebellion to fight against the climate and ecological emergency we are now facing, an emergency that threatens the very conditions of all life on Earth. I have been an environmental lawyer for 30 years, working to create new treaties, EU agreements, and national laws aiming to prevent the situations we are now finding ourselves in. Sadly, I know this emergency cannot be averted by government signing weak compacts and voluntary agreements with the biggest polluters on Earth, nor by tweaking carbon markets that have been gutted of climate ambition by fossil fuel lobbyists. We need to overhaul our political systems to limit access to government by big business. We need citizens' assemblies to allow ordinary people to decide the scale and pace of transition on the basis of independent scientific advice. We need new laws to prevent ecocide, the destruction of the insects, plants, and ecosystems that humanity needs for food, pollination, clean water, and healthy oceans. Every parliament, state legislature, and local authority needs to declare a climate and ecological emergency, following the lead of the 128 councils in the UK, including London and the UK Parliament, and to start allocating resources differently. The reality is that politicians and powerful elites who benefit from business as usual are not going to stop their destructive practices or loosen their grip on financial and economic levers. They will keep asking for fossil fuel subsidies. The official estimates of financial support to fossil fuels are between 370 billion and 620 billion US dollars over the period 2010 to 2015, with the UK spending £10.5 billion a year, making the UK the biggest fossil fuel subsidiser in the EU. Fossil fuel interests demand that we acknowledge their unfettered right to carry on financing new coal and fracking and opening up gas and oil reserves even in the last remaining pristine places on Earth. We must insist that our rulers acknowledge the human rights and ecosystems are protected under law and must now be put at the centre of our legal, political and economic systems. Normal politics has failed us. It has brought the whole of the planet to the brink of ecological disaster. We cannot invoke and rely on the inadequate legal tools of the last 30 years that have allowed this crisis to happen. We need everyone to unite, from the left, the right, and every shade in between. And especially young people, many of whom are too disillusioned to vote or are excluded because they're only 16. We need everyone to undertake mass civil disobedience to create a new political reality the whole world over. But we cannot get there if we work in silos and factions. We need a movement of movements to model the unity and the urgency we need right now. The new movement of movements must be led by our youth, and by those who have been resisting business as usual, especially communities of colour and those at the forefront of oppression. The new movement must be based on the reality that the legacy of colonialism, combined with current forms of capitalism based on never-ending extractive growth, is literally killing us. The reality is that 4 environmental defenders a week are being killed in the global south. We in the global north need to honour their work and join their struggles by also throwing our own bodies on the line. We need a socially just transition for everyone on Earth, not just for workers trapped in the toxic industries that need to be phased out, but for everyone at the sharp end of austerity and ecological destruction. Climate and ecological destruction are at heart issues about social and intergenerational justice. We cannot just fixate on the maths and the science of climate change and leave people and fairness out of the equation. These are the facts that justify the unification and intensification of our shared struggles, and which will only succeed if we have a worldwide rebellion. Climate change denialists cannot cover up the fact that the struggle for access to natural resources, especially freshwater and arable land, is intensifying, and that large parts of the planet are already becoming uninhabitable due to food and water scarcity. Humans have transformed 51% of Earth's land cover from forests and grasslands to crops, cities and grazing lands, but in ways that actually undermine agricultural productivity, destroy biodiversity and encroach on indigenous lands. Topsoil is now being lost 10 to 40 times faster than it can be replenished by nature, and 30% of the world's arable land has become unproductive due to soil erosion since the mid-20th century. The world's insect population has fallen by 60% since the 70s. Large parts of Europe look green but are biodiversity deserts. The birds and the bees are dying. Current extinction rates are at least tens and probably hundreds of times greater than background rates, destroying entire ecosystems both on land and in the sea. Climate change is warming up the atmosphere, the oceans are acidifying, and the cryosphere, the part of the world covered in ice, is literally in meltdown. Abrupt, non-linear, irreversible changes are underway in the Arctic, Antarctica, Greenland, and the world's glaciers, which are crucial to food, water, and agricultural production. The human consequence of these changes, economic instability, large-scale involuntary migration, conflict, famine, and the collapse of economic and social systems are plain to see and reported daily, but these stories are not linked in the mainstream political and media coverage to climate and ecological emergency that is already upon us. Between 2006 and 2011, 60% of Syria suffered the worst long-term drought and crop failures in the country's history. 2 to 3 million people became poor, and many of them were internally displaced. The resulting social instability amplified the political factors that led to war in Syria, with now half its original population of 13 million having migrated or been internally displaced. Something similar is occurring in Yemen, where up to 10 million people face starvation, despite millions trying to move to safer, once fertile grounds. The received political wisdom that people in rich countries can sit tight and buy their way out of catastrophe, or know that the welfare state will save them, is looking more and more fanciful as we remain in the grip of austerity politics. Anyone with an understanding of how the global food system works, especially of how the world's food supply passes through less than a dozen choke point ports, will know that our economies are deeply intertwined. Everyone will be affected, joining the millions who already are all over the world. Poor communities, especially people of colour, whether in the global north or the global south, who have always been on the front lines of environmental injustice, will likely also bear the brunt of the new catastrophes. Are humans destined to become extinct as a species? Will we be slugging it out for what little remains by arming ourselves and building walls to keep out those less fortunate than ourselves? Can we really dismantle the toxic systems that have given rise to these gargantuan problems in the short window we have now? No one knows what will happen, and no one can say for sure whether or not fundamental ecological tipping points have already been breached. The good news is there are millions of people mobilizing all around the world to stop humanity falling off a cliff. And they also have some sharp new ideas to create kinder, regenerative societies that can start the process of restoring nature and create communities of resistance and resilience to the impacts we cannot avoid. They want to do more than just avoid extinction or merely survive. They are building a movement built on solidarity and well-being, so everyone and every part of everyone can flourish. Ending domination over nature goes hand in hand with tackling all forms of domination and hierarchy. The struggle for climate justice is also the struggle for racial, gender, sexual and economic equality. We are not alone. Actions are happening all over the world. In Ghana, Extinction Rebellion activists recently held an event calling for action on the climate and ecological crisis in Africa. The event was staged in solidarity with those in the Global South and the entire world. The impact of the climate catastrophe is part of our daily life. That is why this event is important, said the Ghanaian activist Wxaxrxp.
Okay, this is Africa. Ghana, Eastern region, Agomanya market. We are the youth and the women of this market. We have a problem. The problem we have is that we don't have enough space in the market to sell. If you can witness yourself, anyone that is watching, you watch, the women on the sand, the ladies, the men, the youth, everybody is on the sand. You can see the condo, even near the border. How can you use the condo? Why the border is here? It is not good. So we are calling anyone to sell people that may see our concern. We say we invite everybody in the world to come to our concern. We plead to anyone, anybody, even Bill Clinton, even the American president, even John Bush, anyone at all. We say we invite you. Even the Chinese people, you can see yourself. We say we need help. Enough is enough. We cannot be deceived by any NGOs, by any politicians, by any people. So we say we need your help. So as we are speaking now, we are speaking for CNN to solve our problem in the world. So this is what we have to say for now.
This year, Extinction Rebellion has injected a new sense of energy and urgency into the climate movement. Thousands of people have joined, participating in non-violent actions by blocking bridges, blocking roads and shutting down government buildings. While media headlines have focused on our work in the United Kingdom, Extinction Rebellion has started an international solidarity network to support existing resistance in the majority world, working closely with activists in West Papua, Bangladesh, Mongolia and the Caribbean. Extinction Rebellion is also linking with and learning from other movements. At the UN Conference on Climate Change, Extinction Rebellion supported the Alliance of Small Island States and the Climate Vulnerable Forum, together representing over 80 countries with 1 billion people. We helped pull together an international emergency coalition to reject weak language that would have condemned them to extinction. While we in the global north might only just be feeling the effects of climate change, the majority world has long since known the tragedy that the climate crisis brings. Support is also being provided by the youth-led school strike movement started by Greta Thunberg, to the newly emerging birth strike movement, which is taking off in many countries to support people who are choosing not to bring children into this world unless and until conditions improve. In the US, the Sunrise Movement is building bipartisan support for a 10-year mobilization and investment plan called the Green New Deal. What all these movements have in common is a complete rejection of neoliberal economics and business-as-usual politics. Yes, it is too late to prevent all the negative impacts of climate change, but this cannot destroy our capacity to nurture. It cannot destroy our capacity to love and our sense of justice. We can and now must redesign human societies based on love, justice, and planetary boundaries so that no person or society is left to face devastating consequences, and we learn to restore nature together. Faced with toxic systems that are destroying all life on Earth, affirmation of this vision and rebelling against whatever gets in the way becomes a sacred duty for us. We can and must succeed in catalyzing a peaceful revolution to end the era of fossil fuels, nature extraction and capitalism. Life on Earth depends on it.
Thank you. We're the Second Line Social Aid and Pleasure Society Brass Band, and we're proud to be here with you today. Climate change. Yes. Everybody have their bells?
Allies, fellow human beings, we are on stolen land. Let us remember the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people who lived on this continent before my ancestors arrived, and that indigenous people are still living with the toxic effects of settler colonization. I am someone whose ancestors saw this land as an untapped resource that they could extract and exploit. And they did. Many of us have reaped great wealth and benefits from the value extracted from this land and from the stolen lives of Africans brought here as slaves. Part of the work we are here to do is to recognize the ways this story perpetuates itself, running beneath and throughout the story of America. This mindset of exploitation, domination, and competitive accumulation brings us to where we are today. We are here in a society so addicted to growth and consumption that we continue burning more and more fossil fuels, attacking or simply disregarding the most dire warnings from science and policy leaders, even as extreme storms, droughts, heat waves, and crop failures are already causing suffering to many of those who have done the least to drive these changes. Many species are already gone forever. Many more will suffer under even the most optimistic predictions for our future. We ring these bells, grieving for what is already lost, and for the future already scarred by the consequences of our inaction.
You are unlawfully in the roadway and obstructing vehicular traffic. You are ordered to leave the roadway and utilize the available sidewalks.
In many places you hear the words climate justice and demands for climate justice. What does that mean? It means putting the rights of people and the rights of nature into our decision-making processes and considering them as the starting ground for what needs to happen. And it sounds quite obvious, but that's not the case at the moment. At the moment, nature is there to be exploited. The profits of private corporations, the economic system is given priority over the rights of people, over the rights of nature. And we have a system based on prioritizing essentially what the benefits and the costs are based on an assumption that is the benefits and costs of private industry, the private system, private economic rights that should trump in our decision making. So when people are talking about climate justice, they're asking for a reconsideration of the way in which we make decisions that would prioritise those who are at the forefront of the fight against climate inequalities. For example, they're asking for people who've suffered from environmental damage, people who are defending their own lands, people whose livelihoods are dependent on natural resources. They're asking for all of those people to be put into the equation and not to be treated peripherally in our decision making. They're asking for the rights of future generations to be considered, not just the rights of present-day corporations to carry on making unfettered profits. So climate justice is shorthand for looking at the many different ways in which we exclude and marginalise the interests of people, including future generations, including the interests of people in many other parts of the world who don't have a say in the way in which we make decisions here.
Yo llegué aquí, a Inglaterra, en agosto del 2018, con unas ideas muy diferentes de lo que pensaba hacer en Inglaterra. Y tenía la impresión de que lo que era importante en la vida eran otras cosas. Y cuando llegué aquí, que leía las noticias, empezaba a entender todo lo que afectaba, como el climate change o el cambio climático estaba afectando ya a las personas en todas las partes del mundo y cómo nos iba a afectar a nosotros, cómo nuestro sistema, nuestra forma de vivir, de consumir, está completamente arruinando todo lo que hay, todo lo que hemos creado, toda la preciosa naturaleza que tenemos, todo lo que necesitamos para sobrevivir. Todo eso lo estamos destrozando por culpa de nuestras necesidades infinitas. De repente pensé, hay un problema y yo no sabía cómo solucionarlo. Digo, no puedo, yo como persona individual no puedo solucionar esto, ¿no? Y de repente apareció en mi vida Extinction Rebellion. Llegó como una señal diciéndome, sí, tú como persona puedes, tú y todo. Y de repente dije, voy a una reunión, voy a ver qué pasa, qué me cuentan. Y me di cuenta que ellos tenían muy claro que lo que teníamos que hacer era parar absolutamente todo lo que estábamos haciendo y ponernos a rebelar, a decir que estamos hartos, que no seguimos las leyes que nos han impuesto, que ya no podemos reflexionar más cuáles son las soluciones, tenemos que empezar a llevarlas a cabo, tenemos que empezar a hacer la revolución que queremos ver. Y entonces dejé mi trabajo en probablemente octubre del 2018 y dije, a partir de mañana estoy ahí con vosotros haciendo cualquier cosa que pueda hacer. Y así empezó. Empezamos haciendo arte, intentando utilizar el arte como medio para transmitir esta idea de que podemos cambiar el mundo, que podemos jugar con las reglas del juego. Utilizábamos el arte como manera de llegar a otra gente, decir, venga, si vienes a jugar con nosotros y a crear las cosas, te vamos a contar qué está pasando con el climate change, cuáles son los problemas, cómo podemos actuar. Y a través del arte hacíamos workshops, outreach workshops, que no me acuerdo cómo se dice en español, para llegar a más gente y decirles, mira, no solo vamos a empezar a crear cosas nuevas, sino que vamos a cambiar el mundo. Y con todo esto, se fueron en diferentes departamentos, fueron creando muchas cosas. Claro, estaba la parte más política, la parte más legal, la parte más filosófica, la parte del lenguaje, pero luego estaba el arte. El arte es como la plataforma que conecta a todas las otras y la que hace llegar todas las ideas a la gente y la que permite transmitir lo que tenemos que hacer y transmitir estos valores. Entonces dije, venga, ahí me meto. Y entonces he estado haciendo banderas, he estado haciendo pósters, he estado creando slogans, he estado hablando de revolución mientras que hacíamos todo esto, hasta que llegó The Big Rebellion Week en abril. Entonces pasaron varios meses donde hablábamos de cómo acabar con el capitalismo y de repente estábamos ahí y se habían creado una especie de mar de personas que el día 15 de abril del 2019 andaban con banderas por las calles de Londres. Y iban todos hacia diferentes direcciones, algunos a Parliament Square, otros a Marble Arch, otros que se iban a Waterloo Bridge, otros que se iban a Oxford Circus y todos andaban con banderas y iban caminando hacia un sitio que se puede decir esperanza. Iban caminando hacia el cambio y llegamos ahí y estuvimos 2 semanas acampando, pero es que no eran 2 semanas de acampada, era mucho más que eso, eran 2 semanas donde estábamos intentando parar la ciudad y decir, hay que parar, hay que vivir en comunidad. Semanas en las que de repente queríamos no solo parar la ciudad y hacer que por fin el gobierno declarase Climate Emergency, sino que queríamos demostrar que se podía vivir en comunidad, que se podían parar todo lo que se estaba haciendo y de repente estar todos juntos unidos y decir, basta. Eran 2 semanas en las que podríamos decir, ahora mismo las decisiones las toma el pueblo tiene el poder y decir lo que hay que hacer. De repente eran 2 semanas donde nos enseñaban a tomar decisiones de una forma completamente diferente, como algo que no había visto. Eran decisiones donde nos dividían en grupos y nos decían, ahora mismo vamos a tener una asamblea y vamos a respetar lo que todo el mundo dice y nos vamos a poner en grupos y todo el mundo tiene una voz. De repente te das cuenta que todo lo que te han enseñado desde pequeño se puede cambiar, que sí, crees que hay unos modelos de vida. Todo eso se puede cambiar y puede ser muchísimo mejor. Y entonces estuvimos 2 semanas experimentando una vida política, colectiva, diferente y diciendo, hasta aquí hemos llegado, no queremos que nuestros gobiernos sigan manejando el cotarro como lo están haciendo hasta ahora, tomando decisiones que las hacen solo por el dinero y no por la gente, donde tenemos unos políticos que no nos representan, que votamos una vez cada 4 años, ya no queremos eso, queremos otras cosas. Y Extinction Rebellion habla de muchas cosas, quiere parar el cambio climático, pero sobre todo quiere parar el ritmo de vida que estamos llevando hasta ahora y no solo pararlo, proponer algo mejor, proponer una alternativa donde vamos a ser todos más felices, vamos a tener más tiempo, va a haber menos desigualdad, va a haber más tiempo para hacer cosas que te gustan y crear. Volvemos al tema de crear, tener tiempo para crear tus propias cosas y en vez de ser máquinas de consumo, somos máquinas creadoras. Todo esto son muchas cosas que intento resumir sobre Extinction Rebellion y es imposible intentar explicar la complejidad de un movimiento en unas líneas. Pero lo que sí que se puede aprender es que de repente con un movimiento como este te das cuenta que necesitas una pequeña parte de la población que empiece a decir no para inspirar al resto. Una pequeña parte de la población es suficiente para empezar a iniciar un cambio y si este cambio es bueno la gente nos va a seguir y vamos a hacer todo lo posible para ser más y decir estamos hartos del status quo, queremos acabar con esto y lo vamos a hacer porque no solo tenemos las ideas sino que tenemos a la gente y tenemos el poder de decir basta.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
BP is responsible for 1.53% of global emissions. I'm asking on behalf of the children of the world, please, please, have a change of heart, declare a climate emergency, and keep your fossil fuels in the ground.
And we're looking at other new businesses that we can create that will absolutely begin to reduce carbon emissions.
Yes, but when will you go fossil fuel free?
We don't know that answer yet.
But if you don't do that very soon, then humans, even humans, will face extinction.
Well, we're going to keep working towards reducing our carbon emissions and we're going to create new businesses and that's all we can commit to at this time.
But you do need to reduce fossil fuels too. I mean, stop taking fossil fuels from the ground. Otherwise, you are basically committing a crime against my future.
Every disaster movie starts with the government ignoring a scientist. Every disaster movie begins with the government ignoring the signs. The barking dog, the flight of birds, the contents of a whale's stomach, the rising temperature, the colour of the rain, a woman speaking. Any woman speaking. The enlightened being, the poet, the artist, the graffiti, the lyrics of songs, the hippies, the child's nightmare, the poor, the sick. Every disaster film has everyone ignoring the crazy homeless woman, asking for change. This is a new piece called Sun Cream in February. You finish writing a book, but you don't send it off right away. You sit reading it, pretending to be the poet you hope will read it one day. You erase a comma, then put it back. Then you erase it again. You wonder why you spent winter writing a book. Because one day we might burn books for heat, and one day we might use books to build rafts, and one day we might tether books together to sail to safety. I think the world ends with dead, unread books. You skim your pages. This is a moment. You take a minute to remember all the lonely hours and all the work still to do. Just to see it get into print, just to hope to get it into any bookshop, just to get this book to that one poet somewhere that will get it, because you have made this book for that poet somewhere, the one poet who will get it. Yeah, you snap your laptop shut. You go downstairs and switch on the TV. The news is on. There are images of empty supermarket shelves. The newsreader is talking about stockpiling food and medicine. They cut to footage of a couple stockpiling tins. They grin into the lens and tell us all at home that they're Brexit ready. I'm Brexit ready, the man repeats. We want to be Brexit ready, his wife nods. We want to be Brexit ready. They say this in unison as they fill plastic storage boxes with tins of baked beans. I think the baked bean situation is covered now. Thank you, John and Elaine in Maidstone. After Brexit, will baked beans be like heroin? You imagine swapping a book for a tin of baked beans. You wonder which book you would sacrifice for a tin of baked beans. You picture yourself scoring a cheeky hit of beans on toast by the public toilet. Hey man, got any of that dirty brown sauce? I'll swap it for the Ayn Rand I'll never read. The news switches to footage of Parliament. MPs are pink-faced and screaming. There's a news debate about whether the PM is racist or not. Oh, an actual debate about whether she is racist or not. She is or not. Is she? Isn't she? Really? She is. Isn't she? Oh, she is. Oh. You switch off the TV and make tea. You stare out of the window at the pink and the sky and the light. It is summer, but it is February, but it is summer, but it is February, but too bright and too warm and too weird and too sunny. It's alarming they don't mention this heat on the news. We need sun cream in February, and my neighbour is having a barbecue in February, and the last ever Super Tusker elephant died, and it's February, and it's summer, and it's February, and it's summer, and what was the point of writing a book or winter when our time is so fractured, divided, distracted, interrupted? Our attention is demanded and demanding attention. But then if not for love, then why are we all here? And what is your soul for? If not for books, for vinyl, for music, for art, for sharing, for dreaming, if not for your glad heart, your joy, for faith and belief, for love, if not for humanity, connection, authenticity, then what else is there? What are you all getting out of bed for? What are your eyes for? What are you looking at? What are you staring at? What's the point of any breath if not to sing for freedom and survival and light and colour and you? What do you march for? What are you fighting about? If not for the elephants, was it really just baked beans?
Well, we've sat down in the road. Some of us have taken the decision not to be moved on, at least not immediately. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next, but it just feels right at the moment. This feels like the right thing to be doing with a group of really amazing people. Solidarity, strength, inspiration, and there's the powerful sense that things begin to change here. That people are standing up for each other, but also for all the other life forms on planet Earth. That we care enough, potentially, to put our liberty at risk. I don't know if that's a real threat yet or not, but we'll soon see. If necessary, I'm prepared to get arrested, but let's just see how things work out.
I'm Wxaxrxp. I'm a writer. For many years I worked with Neil Woods, who was an ex-undercover detective, and we've been researching the history and structure of the global war on drugs. The excerpt I'm about to read is from the chapter we wrote for This Is Not a Drill, the Extinction Rebellion Handbook, exploring intersections between how we talk about drug policy and how we talk about climate change. Fighting the wrong war. A plane skims low over the Colombian rainforest. It's a small one-propeller Cessna. The pilot keeps a nervous eye out for anti-aircraft fire from guerrillas in the jungle canopy below. The plane is spraying herbicide to eradicate coca leaves, grown by desperately poor farmers to supply the insatiable demand of the Western cocaine market. The guerrillas fire at the plane to protect the crop that finances their brutal paramilitary campaigns. The herbicide the plane is spraying is called glyphosate. It is manufactured by the American company DynCorp and sprayed as part of a US-financed Colombian military campaign to suppress coca production. DynCorp, along with the US and Colombian governments, insist that glyphosate is non-toxic for humans. Yet, in 2013, Colombia agreed to pay Ecuador $15 million in compensation for severe health problems the spraying was causing to families along the border. Despite multiple lawsuits, DynCorp itself has never paid a penny in reparations. Glyphosate isn't just killing people. The Colombian Amazon is perhaps the second most diverse habitat on the planet. We are wiping out species we do not yet know exist. This is the ecocidal face of the global war on drugs. Each of the American planes spraying toxic chemicals onto poor farmers below throws a harsh light on just how rich world consumption habits can affect poorer producer countries. It also highlights a perverse discourse around personal ethical choice and creating systemic change. When confronted with rising crime in inner cities or the plight of countries like Colombia and Afghanistan, Western politicians frequently respond with a tired mantra about how, quote, middle-class cocaine users are fueling an evil market and must examine their consciences. There's half a gram of truth in this. No one consuming illicit drugs should be under any illusion about the hideous conditions of their production. But there is one overriding factor that makes those hideous conditions inevitable: the structure of prohibition. It is the global war on drugs that prevents the regulation of the products themselves and the conditions of their production and distribution. Politicians weaponize conversations around personal consumption, specifically to obscure the systemic ethical catastrophe of the global drug policies they support. The hypocrisy is grotesque. We see the same dynamic in climate discussions, the outsourcing to the individual to solve systemic problems. The familiar cliches that this will all be solved by individuals recycling, buying reusable coffee cups, and possibly downloading an app. Personal ethical choice is undeniably important for both the drugs trade and the environment. But as thinkers and campaigners, we cannot let these discussions be weaponized to derail the push for systemic change. Those who created these problems will try and make them yours to solve. Don't let them. When we're talking about the intersections between climate activism and drugs policy, it's been very interesting working with Neil Woods, who was an undercover detective for many years with the Drug Squad. And in the UK, we've been hearing a lot in the past few years about the so-called spy cop scandal, where undercover detectives from the Met Police infiltrated climate activists, formed relations, sometimes like personal, like very intimate sexual relations with women activists, fathered children by them, all under the deception of their undercover identities, and then one day just disappeared. Now this is very obviously unethical behavior from the police in, grotesque ways. But I think when considering the role of the police in both drug activism and climate activism, we should bear in mind that the police learned those dirty tricks fighting the war on drugs. Undercover detective work itself is very much a product of the war on drugs. It is the development of this. Neil was actually encouraged by his superiors to form sexual relationships with vulnerable female targets in order to glean information. He point blank refused. Now, when one talks about resistance to the war on drugs, is that many of the most actually creative forms of resistance to it are actually coming from within the police themselves. The police are going, we cannot solve this problem. And it's important to bear in mind that law enforcement is not a sort of monolithic entity, and there are ethical voices within the law enforcement establishment. Extinction Rebellion is very interesting because it's chosen a very specific stance vis-a-vis the police, i.e. to get themselves arrested. The police, as humanity faces this global catastrophe, the police will have to choose a stance to adopt in return. And it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out in the various factions within law enforcement. Section between talking about drugs policy and talking about climate policy is to always bear in mind that the worst effects of both of these are always borne by the poor and by the global south. The war on drugs has been racist from its very inception, and climate change, in its systemic policy element, has always been directed from the first world to the global south.
Hello, I'm Severin Suzuki speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference. Vanessa Setti, Morgan Geisler, Michelle Quigg, and me. We've raised all the money to come here ourselves, to come 5,000 miles to tell you adults you must change your ways. Coming up here today, I have no hidden agenda. I am fighting for my future. Losing my future is not like losing an election or a few points on the stock market. I am here to speak for all generations to come. I am here to speak on behalf of the starving children around the world whose cries go unheard. I am here to speak for the countless animals dying across this planet because they have nowhere left to go. I am afraid to go out in the sun now because of the holes in our ozone. I am afraid to breathe the air because I don't know what chemicals are in it. I used to go fishing in Vancouver, my home, with my dad, until just a few years ago we found the fish full of cancers. And now we hear of animals and plants going extinct, every day vanishing forever. In my life, I have dreamt of seeing the great herds of wild animals, jungles and rainforests full of birds and butterflies. But now I wonder if they will even exist for my children to see. Did you have to worry of these things when you were my age? All this is happening before our eyes, and yet we act as if we have all the time we want and all the solutions. I'm only a child, and I don't have all the solutions. But I want you to realize, neither do you. You don't know how to fix the holes in our ozone layer. You don't know how to bring the salmon back up a dead stream. You don't know how to bring back an animal now extinct. And you can't bring back the forest that once grew where there is now a desert. If you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. Here, you may be delegates of your government, business people, organizers, reporters, or politicians, but really, your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, and all of you are someone's child. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all part of a family, 5 billion strong, in fact 30 million species strong, and borders and governments will never change that. I'm only a child, yet I know we are all in this together and should act as one single world towards one single goal. In my anger, I am not blind, and in my fear, I am not afraid of telling the world how I feel. In my country, we make so much waste. We buy and throw away, buy and throw away, buy and throw away, and yet northern countries will not share with the needy. Even when we have more than enough, we are afraid to share. We are afraid to let go of some of our wealth. In Canada, we live the privileged life, with plenty of food, water, and shelter. We have watches, bicycles, computers, and television sets. The list could go on for 2 days. 2 days ago, here in Brazil, we were shocked when we spent time with some children living on the streets. This is what one child told us. I wish I was rich. And if I were, I would give all the street children food, clothes, medicines, shelter, and love and affection. If a child on the streets who has nothing is willing to share, why are we who have everything still so greedy? I can't stop thinking that these are children my own age, that it makes a tremendous difference where you are born. That I could be one of those children living in the favelas of Rio. I could be a child starving in Somalia, or a victim of war in the Middle East, or a beggar in India. I am only a child, yet I know if all the money spent on war was spent on finding environmental answers, ending poverty, and finding treaties, what a wonderful place this earth would be. At school, even in kindergarten, you teach us how to behave in the world. You teach us not to fight with others, to work things out, to respect others, to clean up our mess, not to hurt other creatures, to share, not be greedy. Then why do you go out and do the things you tell us not to do? Do not forget why you are attending these conferences, who you're doing this for. We are your own children. You are deciding what kind of a world we are growing up in. Parents should be able to comfort their children by saying, everything's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world, and we're doing the best we can. But I don't think you can say that to us anymore. Are we even on your list of priorities? My dad always says, you are what you do, not what you say. Well, what you do makes me cry at night. You grown-ups say you love us, but I challenge you, please, make your actions reflect your words. Thank you.
You're listening to Walk 30, live on NTS.